Welcome to the Soldier Fund podcast, the platform for untold stories from the National Guard Special Forces community. Join us as we delve into the lives of these elite warriors and the journey of our nonprofit, dedicated to supporting their courageous mission to free the oppressed worldwide. I'm your host, Derrick. Let's dive in. Jordan, we've made it to episode 5.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy, man.
Yeah, you know what's, I shouldn't be surprised by it because I really believe in what we're doing here, but man, our listener base is picking up and they're pretty vocal about the content that we're putting out there.
Yeah, I've been really surprised. I don't know why, but it's surprised at everybody's reaction and that they're actually sharing it and moving along. And I'm excited that we got some leadership on here today.
Yeah, man. The conversation that we had with the Sergeant Major about leadership, I just very much appreciate, and the listeners will hear this in a moment, how much you guys wrestle with calling yourself leaders.
Leadership is a weird thing to begin with. So my team leader, what he used to say about it is, it's really hard to define, but you know it when you see it. And I think the Sergeant Major we have on here today did a really good job of navigating that for us.
It did. We threw him a couple of difficult questions because we knew that he could handle it. And I appreciated a lot his honesty. How about you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that just is his character. That's who he is. So
that's the difference maker, it feels. And as this conversation worked itself out over the course of about 40 minutes, it really comes down to a word that you use in relationship, and leadership is relationship. It's nearly impossible to separate the two.
Oh, absolutely. You have to care. You have to care about your job and the men.
So without further delay, here's our conversation on leadership. So thankful you're on the podcast with us today. As we start, always just your rank and times downrange.
So I'm a Sergeant Major, E9, times downrange, add them up, maybe somewhere in the 7 range. I guess it depends on where where you draw the line of downrange, but I guess, combat deployments, I'll say 5.
Yeah, I'm not sure, was that evidence of TBI there, or it's just been so many?
So will this training count, and how long were you away from home?
Over the years, yeah.
Yeah. Lots of time with head off pillow. So we brought you in today to discuss something that I certainly feel through watching you over the years, you are uniquely qualified to answer. We're going to discuss today the topic of leadership. And before we get too deep into this conversation, this is a topic that is often discussed with people inside the Special Forces community, and I think we should acknowledge has been used to sell a lot of books and a lot of conference speaking. That's not really the conversation we're going to have today. Mostly we're focusing on being a soldier, a National Guard Special Forces soldier. Leadership just has a different tone and temperature inside of this organization. And also, I would say, inside of being a Green Beret. Leadership just has a little bit different stripe. And I would love for our listening audience to be able to hear kind of behind the scenes. What would be really helpful for us, I think, as we get going is what caused you to pursue being Special Forces. And then obviously with your rank, you've experienced success there and advancing as a leader. What were the driving forces there?
That's a good question. Yeah, been around for a while. So, E9, Sergeant Major in Special Forces, over 20 years of service. You can do the math on that one. I joined, right out of high school. Probably a little unique. I've been National Guard my entire career. Never did any active duty time, though I spent a lot of time on active duty. Just came in that time period where, within my first enlistment, 9/11 happened, and then it's just go. I originally joined as an artilleryman, and I spent my first, 6-7 years as an artilleryman. And then 9/11 happened. Went to Iraq as a OIF 2, so right in the beginning, and really as sort of like glorified IED catchers, I would say. But I came back from that deployment that year-long deployment in Iraq, and I was like, man, there's got to be a better way. And there was a guy I knew in an adjacent unit. He said, hey, I'm going down to this tryouts thing for the special forces. And I was like, special forces, what's that? So he's like, oh, it's this unit down here. You can try out, and they do a lot of cool stuff. I'm like, oh man, that sounds pretty good. So I did that. But I mean, before even getting to the special forces part, the thought of being a leader, I don't think. First of all, it's funny when I say it because it feels off. Like I don't think of myself as a leader. I just think of myself as someone who's trying to do the mission and be a steward of my responsibilities and help the organization and the soldiers. So being a leader was never a goal. It just kind of happened. And I think that wanting to take on more responsibility was always sort of the culmination of wanting to understand. So it was the leaders who understood more things. Like I didn't, I wasn't satisfied being the E4, doing a good job or whatever. To me, it was, it was all about learning more, and to learn more, you had to take on more responsibility. So that's sort of where my leadership journey started was in that sort of path to knowledge.
So it wasn't necessarily an objective; it ended up being a byproduct. That's very interesting.
Yeah, I think where I'm at now, I focus on trying to help the younger, newer soldiers, stay on path in their career, because when I was starting my career, I had zero thoughts about how to make it to the next rank or leadership or position. Like it just wasn't, it didn't really, enter into my thought process. I just kind of went from one job to another, and I let the Army determine what my path was. I mean, for me, it kind of just worked out that way. I don't think it was really until I made E8 that I really applied for the next leadership position. I kind of always just moved up to, I've held every enlisted rank, including corporal. And I don't think I really sought leadership until, I got past that team sergeant milestone. And really it was more about, I've got all this time, I've got all this knowledge, I've got to start giving that stuff back,
Jordan, this represents, I think, a tension that we hear often, in that I didn't really join up to ascend a certain level. I joined up to be a helper. I joined up to serve. So this kind of dichotomy in leadership of I've got to look out for my career glide path potentially, but that's not really why I joined up. You hear that story a lot.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think that makes the best leaders, honestly, because if you go in and you're completely career driven, trying to get to the top, not necessarily that's not necessarily being a leader. That's looking at this as, maybe I'm trying to get a position or a title or finances or whatever it is. What we just heard described is about relationships and caring about the men and trying to impact others' lives, which is at the heart of it. Like that's an SF mission at whole, going around the world trying to impact people's lives. So if you take that and narrow it down to leadership, I mean, that's a great description.
So would you guys say that, those that have an alternate approach, those that are careerist, for lack of a better term, lose respect inside of this population?
I think that we all have the stories of that person who spent the minimum amount of time in a position, punched all the right tickets, made all the right friends. But I never hear at the end of that story where they're like, and that guy was awesome to work for. It's usually the opposite.
Yeah, I would agree.
So
with
you
that.
bring up something I'm really intrigued by, and I think our listeners would be as well. As a leader, everyone has a style. And with your ability to advance with the respect that you command from the soldiers that are around you, I would love to hear more about your leadership style, what's influenced it, and how you practice that.
Yeah, and you know, I think about this, or I've thought about it at least a fair amount, because there's a good chunk of instruction in the Sergeant Major's Academy where you sort of dive into this, and I thought it was one of the most difficult portions of the course because you're describing yourself. Like, we can all describe other people super easy, I think, but to really sit down and look at yourself and describe yourself, I think it's much more difficult. And I also find it's difficult to really pinpoint what makes my leadership style effective or not effective. I'll reserve the the right for somebody to determine if I'm effective or not, outside myself. I just do what I think is right, and people are going to determine whether that was good leadership or not. But I think sort of the things that shaped my style, I never really had that terrible leader where I was like, I'm going to be the opposite of everything that person's, stands for. Never had that, fortunately. I had an SF sergeant major tell me one time that the Army spends a lot of money and effort training E6s, because when you think about it, your first squad leader, oftentimes, good or bad, will put that taste in your mouth, and you'll either stay in or you'll get out. And they have the most constant direct contact with lower enlisted soldiers of anywhere in the Army. So the Army puts a lot of time into trying to teach E6s, how to lead. So fortunately, I think I always had, that good squad leader level of leadership, and that lower leadership. I think the combat rotations have really served to shape my leadership over the years. And I think I think how I normally try to describe it is, I'm a person who wants to lead out front, will be out leading out front. I'll never ask you to do something that I either haven't done or wouldn't do. And I think that's served pretty well up until this point. But I also think that as you ascend and as you take on more responsibility and more organization, or a large organization, that necessarily has to change. And finding what that style is has to evolve as you move up the organization, because you can't be a brigade level leader and think that you're gonna go out and lead the charge, or you're gonna be first truck in the convoy. It's not gonna happen that way anymore. So I think like my leadership style has started off as that sort of I would say typical, just out front. I'm going to do everything you're going to do. I'm going to do it first. And, if you're coming with me, you're coming with me. And I think it's, evolved from there.
That can be a very difficult transition as I sit and talk with you guys. And it's actually a very distinct pivot point where your leadership is predominantly being with the men, getting out there first, you're saying, and then you have to pivot essentially. And watching you present a slide deck, obviously you've made this pivot very well, but it becomes a lot about, for lack of a better term, being that go between higher command and the ODAs, right? And learning how to be in the middle there and represent the interests of both equally. That's got to be a really tough challenge.
Yeah, I think In the SF community, a lot of weight is put on the ability of the tactical leader, because you can see it. It's in your presence. You can watch somebody, you can evaluate somebody. If you ask me, what's the group commander's leadership style, and not pointedly, I'm just making a broad term. Anybody at a higher echelon of leadership, what is their leadership style? It's more difficult to pinpoint, because you don't get as much interaction with those people. But at the same time, like, as you become that person, you need to figure out, how am I gonna still inspire down to that lowest level.
Yeah, well, I would assume, Jordan, you're welcome to chime in here. I would assume that your history on the team really determines how people view you, even from a distance, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I just listening to this whole thing, it kind of, for me, goes back to relationships and caring. So leadership styles, whatever that may look like, is different for each guy, and how you even lead each guy, because they have different learning techniques and styles and whatnot. And really, I think the Army has a definition for leadership. It's providing purpose, direction, and motivation to get a task done. That's their thoughts on it. But I think for us, the guys that are actually in the fight, it's caring about each other. And then as you move up with more responsibility, is okay. It goes from when you're very basic soldier skills, like, I'm going to be the best at tactics, or as a medic, I'm going to be the best medic I can be because I care about the dudes. And then as a team sergeant, it's the same thing. I'm going to be the best team sergeant I can be because I care about the men. And then moving up to sergeant major, you're the in-between guy, but as long as you're not career driven, this is, I would say, probably 90% of the time, if you're not just career driven, you still have a heart for the men and the regiment as a whole. And even when we say regiment, we mean the men. Like, we're right, doing what's best for them. So and I think what makes a good leader is a guy who can look at each individual and say, maybe I need to tear into this guy a little bit, but on this guy, it's not going to work. So I have to be flexible and moldable a little bit to get them to do it I need them to do, because I care about them. It's what's safest for them. It's what's best for them. It's what's best for the mission, all these other things.
This is what combats a little bit, I think, as I'm watching as a civilian from a distance, all the books that are coming out, all the podcasts that are coming out, there are these very general, generic principles that are rooted in combat, rooted in experience, being downrange. As I spend time with you guys, though, it just feels different. It does feel incredibly personal. And what I don't know, and what I'm eager to ask today is that a Green Beret thing, or is that because I'm closer into this community? It feels like I know exactly how to lead this soldier, different from that soldier. I know this soldier's family situation. I know how they are under stress because we've been in combat deployments over and over again. Where does that come from? Is that something that's forged when you're in these high levels of stress situations downrange? Is that where that happens?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both, really. Like, in our selection process, you're looking for guys that are team oriented and are able to build rapport. So they have some sort of capacity to build relationships and some sort of emotional intelligence. And I think when you get to a team, it's a very small unit. So everybody knows everybody, and I think we put a lot of emphasis in our mission sets with being those people who can go out, make friends, and influence people. So this focus on our ability to connect with people, make friends, understand people, it doesn't just happen outside of our team on missions. Like, that's all that stuff happens within the team as well. So I think it's a combination. You're already selecting guys that are able to work well in a team and put the needs of the team in proper priority, and then then we're also constantly training on being those people who can go out, make friends, influence people, and read the situation. So, and then in your your leadership schools, they just reinforce that. I think it's something that comes more easily to us as a community than it may come to a conventional Army leader who's more used to that sort of infantry style. Not that it's bad, but yeah, I think it's a combination of all the above.
So let's talk about quickly. I can very much appreciate that answer. It leads to more questions, as a good answer usually does. I feel that we find who we are as leaders when shit hits the fan. And if you'd be willing, I'd love to hear an experience that you had during a combat deployment that perhaps your leadership had to emerge in a new way in a difficult situation.
So I'll give you one non-soft and one soft. So one non-soft is, OIF 2. I'm an E6 squad leader, running convoys in Iraq, primarily in and around Baghdad, Balad, Bakuba. And we had just gotten there maybe a month or two, something like that. Hadn't seen anything yet. So we go on this convoy, hit our first IED. Boom. Thing goes off. And fortunately, we didn't lose anybody, but it destroyed one of our vehicles. And that's where I think I first realized that combat's for real. Somebody's actually trying to kill you. And two, to be a good leader in times of crisis, people are just going to look at you, and they're going to look at you for the answer. And if you don't have the answer, if you don't look like you have the answer, that's not going to instill a lot of confidence in them. So, it really taught me how to manage people in a crisis. I mean, and then it wasn't 5 kilometers down the road, get into another stuck convoy, waiting for them to clear an IED, and we start taking small arms fire, ambushed from the right side of the road, out in the palm trees. And I remember, now this is not a great story, but I remember the trucks behind us had so this is a little more context. There's probably about 4 or 5 units, maybe 30 trucks. We only had 3 of them. We were just kind of in the middle, just with a bunch of other units that were going to the same place, going up to Balad. And when the ambush started, everybody just started firing. So you get that, that death blossom. This is early OIF 2. This is just what everybody did. My guys didn't do that, of course. But everybody around us just started shooting everything. And I'm looking around, and I'm seeing these farmers, running for their lives because they're getting rounds coming their way. And the unit behind us had thought that one of the Hiluxes approaching was an enemy Hilux, and they shot it up pretty good. Turned out not to be. Turned out to be a bunch of civilians. But it was that point right there where, I'm coming from a unit that's not with any of these other units. They're all trying to determine what to do. And with my assistance, we got in there, and I'm like, listen, we gotta treat these people, pull them out, treat them. We call in the medevac. Everybody's trying to figure out what to do for the ambush. We have this Apache, doesn't have comms with the convoy, lands on the road, the pilot opens up his hatch. I go up to the helicopter. It's running. Of course, we have to write notes back and forth. I'm trying to describe to him, hey, the enemy's over here. Give us cover over this way. He takes a note, gives me a thumbs up, closes the door, takes off, goes and does his thing. So I mean, those experiences there were really kind of, foundational experiences, at least in my leadership journey, of how to deal with that stress of combat and being that leader when everybody's sort of looking at you for what they're supposed to be doing next.
That's got to be an incredibly difficult thing to not allow the chaos around you to become that chaos inside of you, because so many people, both innocents and those that are in uniform, are depending on you keeping it together.
Yeah, and I think that one of the best things that I find to keep the team intact in those high stress situations is to be the sort of the calm in the room, or be the short, concise orders, stuff that's easy to follow and very direct. I think if you meet a crisis, an animation with more animation, it just becomes more high stress. I think what I've always found to get the best performance out of teams during high stress was to be the more calming demeanor in the room. And it's kind of like, can you break it down? Like, simplify the tasks. There's a million things going on right now, and if you can quickly prioritize and then issue short, concise orders and get people moving in the same direction, focusing on the same things, I think people tend to calm down.
Yeah, but it's an incredibly unique skill set, though. Correct, Jordan?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, to stay calm through it all. And what he was just describing is probably one of my biggest fears. Not that I'm a sergeant major by any means, but in my mind, thinking worst case scenario, and I think this is a Green Beret-ism also, is looking at it and being like, I don't want to be the guy standing there that doesn't know what to say, that doesn't know what to do. Whether it's you're new on the team, you want to know your skill. If you're leading the team, you want to know how to lead. So everybody is overindulging in as much information and as much training as they possibly can be, because they don't want to be the guy that says, I froze up because I just didn't know what to do. Training didn't take over. And then the next component of that, and I've done this with my teams before, is contingencies. Like, we would run contingencies into the ground. Well, what if this happens? What if this happens? Well, we just unlocked a new fear. So we should probably, how do we prepare for that? What do we need to bring with us, or whatever? Just so that, and I think the more prepared you are, and the more you've war gamed these scenarios in your head and tried to come up with it, the easier it is to stay calm. I mean, I could be wrong about that, but I think there's a psychological aspect to it that prepares you for those moments. And I'm sure Sergeant Major has done that himself. He thinks, well, what if this happens? What if we do it even in conversations? Like, before we get on here to talk to talk, I'm like, well, what if he asks this? I'm going to need to know what to say. So I'm trying to war game this conversation even.
That's a phrase I've picked up from you guys, war game. And it feels like it's just a way of life. But, Sergeant Major, this gets back to something you mentioned very early on in this interview. And I think it really characterizes this population. If there's something that you guys don't know, you're not going to stop until you figure it out, or somebody lets you know what's going on. The interesting thing for me, watching you guys as leaders, and why I'm so motivated to make sure that you guys have all the resources you could possibly ever need, is that you take that curiosity and you point it inward. What is it about me as a leader that I don't know, and who can help give me that information? My curiosity is that something that is just part of the personality when you're going up to the Q course, or you're going to that first SFRE? Is that just part of who you are? Or does the Green Beret culture just build that in you? Because it seems to be across the board, all you guys are very, very curious about what's going on internally that could either help you perform better or is causing you to underperform.
Yeah, I think it's one of the top qualities that I always look for in members of any team is introspection. The people who are always outward focused tend to always be the worst teammates. It's the it's the guys that are, stuff happens to them. The Army did this to me, or that enemy, like they just did that, and that's what screwed the whole thing up. Like everything is outside. The reason for everything happening is outside of them, outside of their control, and it's happening to them. I think that the best team members and hopefully the best leaders are always the ones looking internally and trying to determine what it was that they could have done better. And I think that serves a better focus. Nobody wants the guy that's always whining about, something happening to them. You're always better served, focusing internally, even if there are external forces, acting on you, you can only control what you control. So, I think the introspection is, I think, a key element that I'm not sure that we cultivate. I think it comes with the type of person that makes it through the selection process.
I was going to say the same thing. I think it's the type of guy that even shows up is already curious about the process. And most guys are already trying to learn the process and what I need to do. And then there's also the other side that, looking internally, can I make it? And I mean, that goes over to everything. Why are we even good with other peoples of the world? Is we're curious about them and what's going on with them. I mean, that's what makes us good at it.
Yeah, so it sounds like what we're saying here is a little bit of a both and. There's a natural curiosity that is then the community embraces and develops and matures. And part of this may be a very leading question, and I'm okay with that. But at your level of leadership, what do you do when you see a Green Beret that's losing his way in that? Not that they're a bad soldier or that they're broke off, but we all have peaks and valleys in our participation, leadership. We see this happen sometimes with ODAs. How do you address when a soldier's lost his way with that introspection?
That's a difficult one. I think decisions in combat are pretty straightforward, and I've never struggled with decisions in combat, because you either do it and it works, or you do it and it doesn't work. I think the hardest decisions I've ever made in my career always relate to administrative action with soldiers, dealing with the complexities of somebody's emotional state, professional conduct. Just it's that type of stuff that is always the most difficult. And to deal with the soldier, I think individualization is always very important. I think not beating around the bush is very important. If I were doing something wrong, or if I was on the wrong path, I think I would appreciate more a leader that lays it out for me in the beginning, and what are the clear expectations from here. So I think it's a tone in the beginning. I think it's a tone that I don't know that as soft guys we're really good at setting in the beginning. I think we sort of sometimes take for granted that everybody's gonna be awesome and 100%, no mistakes ever, which is definitely not the case. People make mistakes all the time. So we sort of skip this idea of clear rules and expectations up front. So, trying to be that person that sets those expectations up front and evenly adhering to those across the board. But if you do get someone who is outside of those expectations, I always think the best thing to do first is to be upfront and direct about it. Maybe they don't know. Maybe they weren't aware. Maybe they're waiting for somebody to ask. I think lately I've been kind of reading Simon Sinek's stuff, and he is very much all about the people. The organizations should serve the people, not the profits. That stuff comes as a result of your culture and your people. So I think one of his talks, you have a manager and you have an employee. An employee is not performing, and in a typical organization, the manager would go in and yell at the employee for not performing. But his thing is more along the lines of, well, don't go in and yell at him for not performing. He's not going to perform any better. What you really should be doing is asking him why he's not performing. What is keeping that person from performing? Because everybody on a team wants to perform. These guys are here because they volunteered multiple times. They want to be there. So if a guy is not performing, it's generally not because he doesn't want to. There is something going on that is keeping him from performing, and to be able to help solve that is, man, it's always tough.
Seems that there's based on that answer, I certainly can agree through observation. It seems that honesty is a hallmark of leadership inside this community. Am I right about that?
Yeah. I mean, it's all about trust. I think part of General Dempsey's profession of arms is trust. Mission command is knowledge, intent, and trust. Like everything is trust. Like the military is built on trust. I need to, as a leader or as a commander, you need to be able to issue your mission type orders and trust that your soldiers are going to go out and execute. So nothing crushes trust more than lying to your soldiers. I mean, I had this exact sort of experience just recently, and I was sort of outside looking in, and fortunately it has resolved itself at this point. But as someone outside of the situation looking in and looking at these senior leaders not being truthful with their subordinates, it blew my mind, because it's impossible to get back. We're always talking about, restrictions in warfare and stuff like that. And there's a huge emphasis on ethical conduct and everything. And rightly so, because you can be ethical for 9 years out of the war, and then you do one incident and now you're in that category of unethical. It's the same with trust. You can have your unit's trust for your entire command, and then you lie to them or deceive them one time, and it's all gone, all of it, and you're probably unlikely to get it back.
It feels exactly like the stories I hear from the Q course, where guys are uninvited for one seemingly very small incident after a year and 3 months. And it's very hard for the civilian mind to wrap around, man, this one thing, but it feels like that's part of the process to instill in the Green Beret. It only takes, exactly like what you're describing, it only takes one incident to destroy a mission, to destroy trust on a team. That's a pretty high standard for you guys to try to rise to, especially, with your career being so lengthy, over 20 years. The amount of pressure that's there, I can imagine, can be a tough weight to bear.
Yeah. And we're not talking about mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. And what we're really talking about is those things that you do as a leader that really just make your soldiers unable to trust you to act in their best interests. A lot of times, I think it manifests itself in sort of this idea that your leaders will throw you under the bus for something. If they won't have your back. I think that's the most typical, places to lose it.
Well, this leads me to, unfortunately, we're running a little bit short on time today, but I've been very eager to get to this question because if there's one thing I've learned is that you guys think constantly about everything, right? As you're looking back over career, if you could go back, and we ask this question often, if you were talking to a younger version of you, or if you were able to get that young soldier aside and give them some very solid leadership advice, what would that advice be?
First and foremost, be good at your job. Like, know your job. You're a piece in the puzzle, and if you don't know how your piece fits in, you're screwing up the other pieces around you. So just to be always strive to be an expert at your job, like whatever that is. I also think that mentors are important. I don't think I valued finding a mentor as quickly as I could have or should have. It's really only in the last couple of years that I've really found a couple mentors, and I tell you, every time I ask them a question, something I'm stuck on, and twice with the same mentor, they've given me an answer that was opposite of what I thought they were going to give me.
Wow. But
I was like, you know what? I'm gonna take this advice, and it's worked out both times. So having that mentor, I think is certainly invaluable. And then I think that it goes back to what we were talking about earlier is, as you're rising as a leader, those rehearsals are key to success in almost any mission. I've probably been burned more times by skipping rehearsals because we get short on time. You got to do this. You got a million other things going on. We're like, oh yeah, we all understand the plan. Yep, got it. Good. Okay, we're gonna go, and then it never works. So rehearsing your plan is the most important thing you can do at the end to validate all of those assumptions that you've put into it, and it's always night and day. It's night and day with the missions that have gone off with thorough rehearsals versus the ones where you skipped them. Be that excellent soldier. The Army has a great path that will take you through the leadership wickets if you stick around and do your obligations. Having a good mentor, and always be willing to rehearse and refine and all those plans.
Awesome. Well, I love to take this opportunity when we have men like you behind the microphone to say a heartfelt, deep thank you for your service to our country and your service to this organization. You are a man that is well respected inside the National Guard Green Beret community, and it's been our honor to have this conversation with you today. Thank you for all the things that you've done throughout your career to invest in other people and to protect, to work by, with, and through to free the oppressed around the world.
Hey, I appreciate it, guys. I really do. I feel honored to have been asked. I said it when you first contacted me. Like, are you sure you got the right guy? But it's been fun. I think sitting down and talking about this stuff, it really pushes you, or pushes me to sort of get these thoughts like out there, and it's really helpful, and I enjoy everything, and I really like what you guys are doing.
Yeah, well, thanks for your time, sir.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the Soldier Fund podcast. If you're inspired by the stories of these elite citizen warriors and want to support their mission, visit us at thesoldierfund.org. Your contributions help us to continue to back the Special Forces soldiers of the National Guard as they fight around the world. Until next time, stay committed to stand with those who serve.